Thanks for choosing this free Anfield Index podcast. If you'd prefer to listen to this or any of our other shows without adverts, then now's the time to check out Anfield Index Pro. With AI Pro, you can supercharge your entire listening experience. You'll not only get all of our podcasts without the ads, but you'll have them far faster with our quick publish feature available exclusively for subscribers. AI Pro also puts you in the heart of our sound studio, with an option to listen to many of our shows live and interact with the podcasters in real time as the shows are recording. Upgrading couldn't be easier. AI Pro is available on all popular podcast platforms, and we have our own apps for Apple and Android. Just head on over to AnfieldIndexPro.com and get started today.
Hello and welcome to AI Scouted on Anfield Index Pro. I'm Dave Hendrick, joined as always by Mr. Karl Matchett. How are you, sir?
Spectacular. How are yourself?
I am good. Right, the purpose of today's podcast, now that the pesky games are out of the way, is to discuss transfers for Liverpool. I think it's obvious to everybody that when you look at Liverpool's starting 11 and what it was this season, we've got one of the best goalkeepers in the world, one of the best right backs, if not the best, one of the best left backs, the best centre back, and three other really good centre backs. So defensively, we're good. We know that backup right back is a bit of an issue, but it looks like Calvin Ramsey and Joe Gomez will be the two that play that role next season. So that's going to be good. Kanate or Matip and Gomez as the backup centre backs, Costas as the backup, left back and Kelleher in goal. So you don't really need to do anything other than bring in Ramsey. But in midfield, Karl, is where I do think we had an issue. I think the Thiago Naby sort of platoon on the left is perfect. And if we do that next season and stick to that next season, so one of them is always in the team, I think we're in good nick. Fabinho as the holding midfielder is great, but we did lack a dedicated backup to him this season. Henderson was a massive weak point in the team this season. His legs look like they're going. His form was atrocious for most of the season. There's a handful of good games you can point to. Only really one standout performance as an 8, which was Everton away, which was early in the season. I think that's the position you need to address. And if you do that, you can move Henderson into being that more dedicated backup to Fabinho. And he did have more of his good games as a 6 than as an 8. And then you've got Harvey Elliott and Curtis Jones, who can be backups in that right-sided role, and Curtis can also obviously cover on the left side. So I do think that starting midfield role is one that Liverpool have to address this summer. And then in attack, you've got Salah, you had Mane, you had Diaz when he arrived, and you had Jota as sort of 4 for 3 positions. I would look at it as Salah starting, Mane central, Diaz left, Jota as sort of the backup, the first backup to all 3, who plays a lot. And then behind them, you know, we had Divock, he's gone, but Cade Gordon, I think, will play a bit more next season. Could be that third right-sided player. Carvalho will play, I think, predominantly on the left when he plays for us. And then Bobby, obviously, as a central option. With Mane going, I think a striker is needed, someone to play in that position. We can discuss the type of player. But I think those are the two needs that Liverpool have now. With Carvalho in and Ramsey looking likely, I think a starting midfielder and a starting forward have to be priority now.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, there's definitely conversations to be had over the exact role of those players coming in, but those are the two areas that need boxing off this summer. I think last year when we spoke about the need to start renewing the team in certain cases, I think we've done an unbelievable job of that just with 2 signings, to be honest. If you want to count Kelleher as an addition who has shown that he can be part of the renewal in terms of squad, then that's another good step as well. You know, having a goalkeeper who's reliable enough to take you to a cup final is a great thing to have. Not something that Liverpool have had for sure, probably since Dudek Kirkland. Would it be fair to say that we've not had 2 goalkeepers who are both capable of being in the first team. I think that's probably what I would say.
Yeah.
Obviously, a wide variance in ability and experience and all the rest of the stuff that comes with it, but you can't have two Alisson quality goalkeepers in the squad. That's not allowed. Then Konate and Diaz, I think, are two very, very difficult to improve upon signings in terms of how Liverpool want to play and how good that both of those can be. I genuinely think over the last 3 months of the season, people have probably started to get that excited about Konate as they were the first 2 months about Diaz.
Yeah.
His performances have been off the charts. Now, we know there have been a couple of shaky moments, a couple of real mistakes or things that have not gone quite his way or where he has cost a goal directly or indirectly. He's a young centre-back. That's going to happen at the highest level of the game for another couple of seasons to go. We've seen Matip still do it, and it's happened to Virgil van Dijk, believe it or not, in his career. That's going to happen. It doesn't detract from what he does for 89 minutes of 90% of other matches. His ceiling is unbelievable, and that is going to be one of our better signings of the last 3-4 years, I would say.
He's 23. He's just turned 23. And I thought, Karl, he was magnificent in the Champions League final.
Yeah, agreed completely. We both said in the end we thought Matip might just get the nod just because of Benzema's movement and all the rest of it. I think giving the nod to Konate, one, must be such a big confidence booster considering he wasn't even in the lineup for the first half of the Premier League season. He's basically there now, isn't he? He's the first choice partner for Van Dijk right at this second. So heading into the new campaign, you could reasonably expect him to be the starter on the right side, and that's again a bit of an evolution of the team. So even if nothing else happens, even if we don't sign anyone else, to be quite honest, there's two parts of the team which are different to last season when it started, and both of those I think are an improvement.
Yeah, I agree. I think Diaz is an upgrade on Sadio, the left winger, or at least what Sadio had become as a left winger. And I do think Konate is an upgrade on Mata. But as good a season as Joel had, I think it was overhyped. I mean, he won Player of the Month in what was comfortably the worst month he had, which was funny. But I think Ibu over the last, like you said, 3 months really found his stride, and him and Virgil really found an understanding. And they're so big, so strong, so quick, so dominant that those two together should frighten everybody for years to come. Because I think Virgil can play till he's 35, 36 at a really high level. Like I look at Thiago Silva at 37, still playing at a good level. And Thiago Silva was never as good as Virgil. I think Virgil can play till he's 35, 36 if he has the desire to do that. And that's 5-6 years next to Konate. And imagine what Konate is going to be in 5 to 6 years. So that's brilliant. Obviously, we know with Trent, he's still really young. He turns 24 later this year. So there's so much more to come from him. That alone is reason to be confident about this team. The fact that, those three plus Ali are all going to be there for the next 5-6 years. That's a basis to build off. Andy Robertson's 28. I'd imagine he gets replaced in 2 years, maybe. But again, we deal with that when it comes to it. It's not something to worry about now or even next summer. The midfield is where the regeneration needs to happen next. Like you said, we brought in Diaz, we've brought in Carvalho, we've brought in Jota in the last 2 years. Kate Gordon looks like a huge prospect. There's the possibility that Harvey Elliott can move back into the front three or if it becomes a front four or whatever and be very, very effective there. Bobby Clark, Frauendorf, Musolaski. There's a lot of reason to be confident about what Liverpool are going forward, even factoring in, the decline in Firmino and his age and the potential departure of Mo. But if Mo signs on, he's there for another 3-4 years. So those two areas are really strong. I do think we will, and I do want us to address that number 9, replacing Sadio, who looks like he'll go. But the one area that I think immediately needs that attention is the midfield. So it looked like we were going to sign Tchouaméni. We had gone very, very far down the road with him. We'd agreed terms. He'd had a medical. Klopp had met with him, spoke with him, all the rest, and then we got gazumped. Real Madrid came in, made an offer above what we could pay. They made him an offer above what we were willing to go to. And it appears like he's going there, though PSG are now trying to gazump them. So who knows where the fuck he ends up. But it won't be to us, is basically the be-all and end-all of it. Now, he's not an attacking midfielder. He's more of a defensive, controlling midfielder, which maybe suggested that Thiago would shift across and play the right-sided role, or that there was a bit of a change coming in terms of how we play. But I still think we need to address that midfield role, and I would like to see us address it in more of an attacking manner, because as we saw this season with Henderson, with Elliott, when Naby played there, that player spends more time in the final third when we have the ball than they do in the middle third. In possession, it's very much a Fabinho, Thiago, or Fabinho, Naby double pivot, with that third midfielder joining the attack. So with that in mind, I've given you homework. I've asked you for 5 midfielders you think could fill that role, either as an 8, or if the shape shifts and we go to 4-2-3-1, or whatever way you want to work it. Give me your first one to come in and play that midfield role.
Okay, so I have tried to come up with very, very different alternatives. I've gone from, the obvious, I've gone for the expensive, I've gone for the statistical based one, I've gone for the outside the box names, all that kind of thing. So I've got 5 very different ones, again, depending on the role that we want and the tactical evolution that we might have for this forthcoming season. So I'm going to start with the dead obvious one, which is Jude Bellingham.
Yeah, I left Jude off my list on only one basis, and that is I do wonder if Dortmund would sell given Haaland's leaving. But Jude is the obvious one. Jude is the one that's, I think he's a ceiling raiser. I think he can come in and improve us, even at such a young age. I think he's also the one that gives you that future longevity in midfield. Like at 19, Jude could be a functional part of our team for 13 years. He's that level of talent that if you can get him, I think you just go and get him. I think you don't worry about the price. I think you go and you get Jude. Like, I would have been the same about Tchouaméni personally. I would have been the same last summer about Camavinga. I think if you can get them, you get them, because you're going to have them in your team, especially with Jude as an English lad. The likelihood of him pushing for a move to Real or Barca later on in his career is a lot lower than Camavinga or Tchouaméni. With Jude, you're buying someone that could give you over a decade of greatness in midfield.
Yeah, I can't give any argument against any of that. And the great thing is that he could probably be 3 different players for Liverpool at different times if you were to sign him. If you brought him in as an attacking box-to-box 8, you could probably at some stage use him just as that second central midfielder who is going to be, if Liverpool got to a stage where they're even more dominant and stronger than they are now and an even more functioning attacking line, he could be the Thiago, the second one, who can recycle everything and then the odd burst later on. Plus, later on, as his game develops, he could definitely be the 6th, the covering defender, the Fabinho eventual successor, all of that kind of stuff. He can be anything because he has all the tools. He is, in terms of the variance in his game, I would say probably the closest English player I've seen to Gerrard when he came through.
Yeah.
And he could be moulded to whatever you need your team to have. Gerrard, I think, was always more shaped by necessity, to be blunt, rather than what we wanted him to be or who the manager thought the best version of him could be, because he always had to be the one. He always had to be saving the team. He always had to be making up for deficiencies in about 3 other roles. Whereas right now, Liverpool obviously in a much stronger position. We've got better all-round players. The support system's there. Even the academy providing competition for places is better than it was at that time. So it would be a completely different style of choosing his career path once he was in place. The coaches would be able to shape him according to where they think they could get the absolute maximum from him and the roles that he would play in the team accordingly.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I do. And it's funny, you think of Fabinho playing in a 2 at Monaco with Bakayoko as Fabinho as the sitter and Bakayoko as sort of that box-to-box runner. Bellingham could be a much better version of that in a 2 with Fabinho. You think of Thiago at Bayern in a 2 with Goretzka and how well that worked. So Jude gives you, he could play with both of them. He could play with either of them individually in a 2. He could play with Henderson in a 2 if Henderson's the sitter. And as you say, as his career develops and he improves and rounds out his game, he could be anything you want him to be. He could be that controlling mid. He could be a box-to-box in a 2. He could be the sitting midfielder, the one that shields the defence. For now, the role that does make the most sense for him is that more advanced box-to-box in a 3, while also giving you good flexibility. So, yeah, I definitely think Jude is definitely the one. He's the guy that you want if you can get him. My first one is Milinkovic-Savic. Now, in a 3, there's maybe some question marks over his defensive output. He can be a little bit lazy, but in possession, with him sitting ahead of Fabinho and Thiago, with his technical ability, his passing, his ball carrying, I think he could be phenomenal in the Premier League. Now, his age he's 27. That might count against him. The price, depending on what Lazio want, there's reports out there that, 50 million would get him, 55 would get him. At that kind of fee, I think you get him if you can't get Jude. Because I think he could play with Jude as well. I think you could play him as the 10 and put Jude in your double pivot. I've long loved Sergei. So he's probably more a heart pick than a head pick, but he is one I do very much like.
I'd be surprised if we hadn't at the very least continued to watch him, because his numbers are pretty consistent year after year. I think he had one down year maybe last season, I think it was, where he was not quite as good. But previously, when he was part of that 3 with Luis Alberto and your favourite of all time, Lucas Leiva, he was really, really consistently good. Now, I know you and I have always had a bit of a difference of opinion over Milinkovic-Savic specifically, in that you've rated him quite a bit higher than I have at all times. The only reason for that, from my perspective, is sometimes his off the ball work, sometimes his lack of mobility, and he doesn't, for all the unbelievable talent that he has in terms of technique and a shot which is roughly akin to firing a cannonball from 3 yards away from you. He doesn't score that many, and he doesn't really break into the box as much as I would like him to do so for the type of player he is. Now, I assume that for quite a long time that was under tactical instruction, because there's no way that a player who can score as much as he does, or is capable of finishing in the way that he does, wouldn't get into the area unless he was told not to. But it is still something to consider. I think it's not something that is completely part of his game, be that because he doesn't want to or he's been told not to. And I do wonder that if we went to that more, let's say not quite a 2-3-1, but certainly a 2-1 instead of a 1-2 midfield, whether that would be something we would rely on a bit more, because he's not, I wouldn't say that he would be coming in as a creator from that role so much.
I think he can be the creator. I think his passing is phenomenal. I think a lot of it is by design at Lazio. And remember as well, like you mentioned, Luis Alberto, he's the primary creator in that team. And like the thing is, I've watched a lot of Lazio for the last few years. I've never really seen them swamped in midfield. Like, I've never really seen them just be overawed in midfield. And that's what Milinkovic-Savic and his defensive issues. Luis Alberto, who, I mean, defending is a dirty word for him. And Lucas Leiva, who was dog slow when he was with us and is much slower now. And yet, even at that, I know it's Serie A, so it is different, but they were still always able to hold their own. And you think Fabinho over Lucas Leiva, Thiago over Luis Alberto, he's used to playing with those types of players, just not as good as the players we have. I do feel like it could work. And you're right. He doesn't get enough goals. I mean, his career high is 14. That was in 17-18. He got 11 this past season, but he's generally been 7 or 8. That would need to take an uptick. But I do think it's in him. I do think that's there if you give him the instruction to get yourself in the box more. And like a lot of times you'll see him make a break for the box and then stop and wait on the edge of the area. And again, I don't know if it's by design. I don't know if that's him making that decision. But he seems intent on getting in the box, and then he just stops. And he takes up a position about 5 yards from the edge of the box and waits for the ball to come to him. So, I don't know. Under Klopp, I think he would get in the box a lot more. We saw a lot of the positions Henderson was getting in this season. I think if that's him, I think he's double figures goals as opposed to, 3 that Henderson got. So I do think he represents a big, big upgrade. And I'm not sure we actually lose. Like, he's not as good a press. Henderson's not a good presser. Henderson's a volume presser. And even at that, that's taken a massive drop in the last couple of years. I think he's a smarter player. I think he offers a lot more on the ball. And his ball winning is better than Henderson's. Like, his tackling is better than Henderson's. It's just a matter of getting him to do it more often.
Right, well, I'm going to stay in Serie A for my second one, and a player who is not as high profile and is, I would assume, nowhere near the cost of what Milinkovic-Savic would be, but is a player that I really, really like. He has been a first choice for a long time up until this season because of the AFCON during the season. And when he came back, he basically didn't really get back in the starting 11. And that's Ismail Bennacer of AC Milan. Now, he's basically a holding midfielder, but not in the Fabinho way. And he's someone who does the defensive work is exceptional. I think he's a little bit more tackle-minded than interception-minded if you split the two of the defensive midfield type, those categories. But he's actually not far off Fabinho for interceptions and is about the same for tackles. He's also a really, really good player on the ball. His ball carrying is really good from when he was a playmaking midfielder back in his youth days, basically. Really good at getting forward into the final third and playing decent passes into dangerous areas there. I could see him as a right-sided 8, a left-sided 8, and a 6.
I really like him. As you know, I've said for the last 18 months or so that the player Arsenal are screaming out for in midfield is him. We talked about him a bit on the Transfer Committee podcast. If Naby were to leave, if the rumours of Naby leaving were true, he would top my list to come in and replace Naby and platoon with Thiago. He could definitely play on the right side, but I want more of an attacking output. But if we signed him, you'll get no complaints at all from me. He is so good on the ball, so comfortable in possession. He's tenacious. He works really hard. He's very, very clever. I would have no complaints at all with bringing him in. My second one is a bit of a gamble because he's only a kid. But Gavi, contract situation at Barca, they've offered him one, doesn't seem to want to sign it. He has been heavily linked to us. I think he could be that attacking midfielder in the short term, that more advanced one, because he's very quick. He moves the ball really well. He's super intelligent. He's tenacious. And I think he can transition into being the Thiago successor in that other position. So if we could get him this summer and play him on the right, and then next summer we got Jude, and you switch Gavi to the left and have Jude on the right, that might set you up long term to have an incredible midfield.
If you could get Gavi this season for paying his this summer, for paying his release clause, which is around 50 million euros, do it. That's all I have to say on it. He's a sensational player, and he's probably another one that you can still make him the type of player that you want. You know, if you signed him, not Liverpool, let's say, but another team signed him and wanted him to be a 10, you could. And what we've seen him play, like I've said before, left side of the attack for Barcelona. There's no question that he can be he's such a good player. He's so clever, really tenacious off the ball as well. His first touch, his technique, his one touch exchanges of passing in really tight areas. It's just off the charts. He's a really good player. I would expect that he does eventually sign a new deal with Barca, but if he doesn't, I would love us to get him.
It'd be worth kicking the tires on at the very least. Just throw the offer in and see what happens. Like, he's got a buyout. Throw the offer in and see what he wants. You've nothing to lose. And the big thing for me is I want to get him out of Barcelona before they ruin him, like physically, because I'm not sure Ansu Fati's ever going to be the same player as he would have been before they overplayed him and he got hurt, and then they played him again and he got hurt again. And we've just seen Pedri get massively overplayed, go and play the Euros, then be allowed to go and play the Olympics, and then basically have a season, like almost a lost season, where he suffered from injuries. And I do worry that Barcelona are so desperate to be Barcelona and to challenge Real and win things that they're not seeing the wood for the trees. And they're not looking at this with a long-term view. And they're overplaying these kids at what I think is quite a dangerous level.
There's no question that they've overplayed more than just a couple of them. Even people that... no, I'm not going to even go into Barcelona because I'll be here all day, but they are.
We will be here all day.
And it isn't just Barcelona, it is the national team as well. I mean, I think there was 3 or 4 of them last summer to the Euros, straight away to the Olympics afterwards as well, and then straight away into the season with their club level with like a week's break.
Outrageous.
It's absolute nonsense.
Right, give me your next one.
Okay, my next one's going to be really quick, to be honest, because everybody listening knows everything about him already. This one was picked with a marginal tactical shift in mind. If we are looking to go more frequently with what we've seen later on in the season, the 4-4-1-1 or 4-2-4, 4-2-3-1, whatever you call it, doesn't matter. Basically, with our 4 attackers and much more of a platform of 2 in the middle, Declan Rice. Now, I know obviously a lot of people love him, and I know a lot of people hate him because he plays for West Ham or because he's English or whatever the reasons are. But bottom line is his numbers are really, really good. They are, in some respects, on the level with Fabinho, which is not to say he's as good as Fabinho, just that he does a similar volume of certain things. He has played as the 6. He has played in the double pivot. He can play as an 8. I wouldn't say he's exactly an attack-minded 8, but if you have a 2-man midfield most of the time, then obviously it's a very, very different role anyway.
I think in a 2-man midfield, he's better as the one going box to box, being the central midfielder rather than the kind of holding one. I think he benefits a lot from playing with Souček, but again, he would benefit a lot from playing with Fabinho. I just don't know that a Rice, Fabinho, Thiago midfield is going to work a whole lot, because Rice has a lot of the ball at West Ham. And at Liverpool, he's going to have a lot less of the ball if Thiago's in the team.
No, like I said, this was pretty specifically for if it's a 2-man midfield, so then you're always looking at 2 of 3 of them there.
There's no question Declan Rice is a very good player. The problem is, if he was still Irish, he'd be 50 million, which is fair, which is a good price for that player. But he's English now, and he's going to be 100 plus. And I don't know that I could pay 100 million for Jude. I don't know I could pay it for Declan Rice. I don't know that he's ever going to be the player you're buying.
Well, he isn't. You'd be paying the English premium, which is just a thing you have to pay.
Yeah, and that would literally, that's my I like what you said about playing 2 of 3. And if you've got a 5-man midfield group of Fabinho, Thiago, Rice, Naby, and Henderson, nobody has a better midfield group than that. Nobody. For a 2-man midfield, that is unbelievable. And like you said, Fabinho and Rice together could be very, very powerful. But the price is just, it's so off-putting. It's so off-putting.
Can I ask you, if he hadn't changed nationality to English and given, the manager and the way you set up now, what role do you think he would play for Ireland?
It's an interesting one because we're starting to produce talent again, Karl. It's an interesting thing. Most of it is due to the African dysphoria and how many kids are, not most of it, a lot of it is like, Oma Bamidele's a fairly big talent for us. Adam Adey, there's Ogbene, there's a lot of Michael Obafemi, there's Festi Obaseli. There's a lot of young Irish kids that are finding their way now to Serie A and stuff. We're producing good centre backs. Nathan Collins is good. The kid at Cardiff that was at Arsenal, he's good. There's the one at Oxford, McNally, I think his name is. He's meant to be very good. But midfield is still a bit of a mess. Now, the one shining light we have in midfield at the minute is Jason Knight of Derby, who I expect to move this summer. So I do wonder if we'd be playing like a midfield three of Knight, Rice as the 6, and maybe Jason Malumbi as the 3rd midfielder. It's not great now, but I do think he'd be the 6. I don't think he'd be played as an 8.
No, because I mean, obviously playing back 3 now gives a few options. Is it John or Josh Cullen has been involved recently in this?
Josh Cullen, yeah, from he's at Anderlecht.
Yeah, so I think he's meant to be, supposedly has been doing fairly well recently. So I wondered, like, if it had been, not the 3-4-3, but the usual Irish, would he have been used almost as a 10 as well? To be honest,
possibly, yeah, possibly. I mean, let's not forget that Jack Grealish was also Irish for a while, so we could have had both of them. In which case, we'd be a bit better off than we are now, but. Again, Jack Grealish became English, and his price went from what he's actually worth to what he went for. So it's the same situation as Rice.
A 3-4-3 with Rice and Grealish on either side of the forward line. How would you like that?
Listen. I've had to put up with some shit. I've had to put up with it. There's been a lot of Shane Long over the last 15 years. There's been too much Callum Robinson, even though I don't mind Callum Robinson. There was 14 caps of James Collins in attack. Anything is an improvement. Anything at all is an improvement. But we are trending in the right direction, is what I will say. I do think in 5 years there could be quite a good Irish team. We're never going to be great. Like, we're never going to compete for major honours because we produce great players so rarely. But what I will say is that if you're making an all-time Premier League 11, there are 2 Irish lads that are nailed on starters. Dennis Irwin at whichever fullback spot you want, and Roy Keane. And if I want to push the argument, I could probably push Paul McGrath in there as well, because he's one of only 3 defenders to win the Footballer of the Year in the Premier League era. So we do produce the odd absolute gem. Like, when we get it right, we really get it right. But we just don't get many of them, right? We don't get many of them. The other thing as well here is there's too much competition in sport at a young age here. You've got Gaelic football is a massive draw again. Hurling is becoming more and more popular. And rugby has really taken off in Ireland in the last 15 years or so. So a lot of the really talented kids that would have become footballers in the past, and it swings with our national team. Our national team in rugby took off. Our football team declined massively after the retirement of Roy Keane and, the decline of Robbie Keane and Damien Duff. So a lot of kids were swayed to go and play rugby. And if you go to any local rugby club now, the numbers compared to, say, when I was a kid and you were struggling to make up numbers for 7-a-side, now it's incredible. There's been so much money pumped into rugby here as well. So, we've got a small population, and unfortunately for football, there's less pathways and there's no professionalism here. There's professional rugby. So a lot of kids go that way. But yeah, I'll do my next one then. Lovro Mayer of Rennes. So my logic here, Karl, is that when we played last season with Harvey as the right-sided 8, I thought we looked really good in midfield. Harvey, Fabinho, Thiago against Leeds, I thought was sensational. And it got me thinking that maybe, because, Naby and Thiago, similar, different types of players, but can do the same role in similar ways when needed. Fabinho and Henderson, different types, but can do the 6 role. Maybe we get someone in that can play that right-sided role in a similar way to Harvey, but slightly differently and slightly better. Well, actually, for now, quite a lot better. I don't think Lovro would cost mega bucks. I think he's insanely good, though. I think he's one of the most underrated or maybe unknown players in Europe. A lot of people just don't know who he is. But he had a great season for Rennes. He's a gifted passer of the ball. He can get you some goals. He's super intelligent. He would be high on my list. I know I'm naming him third, but he was when I started this, he was one of the first names that came to mind. He's a player I really like him. I think he'd be a great fit.
Okay, so like you just said, maybe people don't know who he is or what type. So the closest player you can think of from in the Premier League to his style, and the maximum you would pay for him if he was on a normal for our club level of wage. What transfer fee max would you go?
I'd probably go to like 35, 40 for him. Now, I think he's going to be worth substantially more than that, but given, he's at Rennes, he's only had the one season there. I think they paid 10 million for him. So I'd probably go to 30, 35, to be fair. Gives them a big profit. And I think I think it's around what he's actually worth now, and I think he's going to become a lot better because, like I said, he's only 24, turned 24 in January, so still plenty of room for development. In terms of players that are similar to him in the Premier League, I mean, Bernardo, in some ways, he's not as quick as Bernardo, but he's a really good dribbler in tight areas. He's got great vision. He's a better passer than Bernardo. This season, he got 11 goals and 13 assists, so the output is there. That was in 3,200 minutes, which is pretty good for a midfielder who did largely play right side of a 3, but can also play left side of a 3 or as a 10 or out on the wing. I would say Bernardo. I would say Bernardo's probably the closest I can think to him. But even at that, he's a bit more of a... Imagine Bernardo with Eriksen's vision and Eriksen's weight of pass, and I think you're getting there. Not as quick, though.
Right, so my fourth one, I had a look for numbers, right? So people who could be ball winning in terms of along the lines of what Tchouaméni has done, along the lines of what Fabinho does in terms of positioning, interceptions, the challenges that they make, the pressures that they put on in the midfield third, progressive passes, switches of play, as much as I could do. And then I added in a couple of bits that Fabinho doesn't do quite as much of, because I was pretty much looking all the way through this as Tchouaméni alternatives, right? So not just attacking 8s, but someone who could come in to do different things in the squad. Because Tchouaméni wouldn't just be coming in to replace player X. He would be doing multiple roles, wouldn't he? So I've added in ball carrying and, like I said, progressive passes and a couple of other things. Now, skipping aside the names who are obviously at the top of that list, like people like Joshua Kimmich and Kevin De Bruyne, Rodri, Thiago, Mateo Kovacic, all these ones who we know, they're very good and we wouldn't be signing them anyway, or we already have them. There were 2 names in particular who kept sticking out to me time after time after time, coming up across all of them. The first one was is now unavailable because he's only just moved, Bruno Guimaraes, at Newcastle, and obviously when he was in France as well. For a 6, for an attacking midfielder as well as an 8, fits the bill right the way across the board. And we said it at the time when they signed him. We said it again after it was confirmed for an even lower fee than had been reported initially. There are going to be about 15 clubs around Europe right now absolutely kicking themselves that they didn't make this deal happen. He is such a good buy for them at such a good price. Now, he would have been, I think, quite a good signing for Liverpool to, again, fill at least 2 positions here. So forget him as well. The second one on the list, who kept coming up over and over and over again, is Curtis Jones. Now, he obviously has played more often than not as the left of the 8 for us in the Thiago and that you're suggesting Keita plays the role of next season. But we already know that when Jones was coming through, he was a 10, he was an attacking midfielder, he was a left-sided forward. And we've not really seen him, let's say, let off the leash to be as attack-minded as he wanted all the time when he was coming through, while he's been in the first team under Klopp. Now, partly, maybe that's because he doesn't quite have the speed to go 15 or 20 metres, let's say. But also, I wonder whether it's a little bit because it was so important that he honed that side of the game to be a first-team regular that he was basically told, you're doing this, forget your attack and stuff because you can already do it. Learn this bit which is needed for this role, and then you'll be a more complete player overall. And so that's where he's been utilised more often than not. But how would you feel about effectively letting 3 really talented young players fight for that one role, plus obviously Henderson to come in there and as the 6 as and when required, because he will start lots and lots of games still. But then you've got Jones, you've got Elliott, and you've got Mr. Portuguese new arrival himself, all of who can play in that 8-sided role.
Carvalho, yeah. It is something that has crossed my mind, and I think Curtis is a lot more suited to the right-sided role. I think if we look at his performances over the last 2 years, I think the few games he played on the right were more impressive than when he played on the left. He's got good synergy with Trent, good understanding with Mo. He's a really good passer. He's a great presser. There's definitely flaws in his game. Like, he doesn't know when to release the ball. That's one. He can be a little bit brainless when runners go past him. That's another. But I mean, what I would ideally like to happen next season is that Curtis goes on loan and he goes somewhere where he plays 35 games and learns what it's like to be an every game starter and play more regularly and get through what are likely to be some inconsistent runs where he's allowed play through them and he's allowed play through his mistakes, and his mistakes aren't the difference between winning the league or not winning the league. That's my issue, is that we're looking to win the league next season. And while the numbers on Curtis are impressive, you've also got to factor in the minutes that Curtis plays are like half the minutes that others are putting up those same numbers in. So it is a smaller sample size. So he is benefiting from that massively. I wouldn't be against it if we spend all our money on getting the best possible number 9 in. I wouldn't be against seeing Curtis play there, but I know what's going to happen, and you know what's going to happen, is that early in the season, Klopp is going to go with Jones, with Carvalho, with Elliott, and then later in the season, Henderson is going to get the role because he's Henderson, and because he's captain, and because experience and intangibles and bullshit. And all you're going to end up with is the same shit we had this season, where that role ends up costing us the title. If you've got 3 and 4 lads in one position and you don't know which is the one, you don't have the one. That's my issue. You have to know who your starter is. And we know who our starter is in every other position. So that would be my only knock on the idea of using Curtis there. I would rather loan him out for 2 years, send him somewhere he can settle in and develop and play every game, and get as much experience as he can and get all those errors and ricks out of his game on someone else's watch, not on ours.
I know he's still quite a divisive player for quite a few people in the fan base as well, of whether he does or doesn't do certain things. I think he's been a bit Wijnaldum'd, let's say, in playing that left side.
The idea that he's a bad player is nonsense, though.
It is. It is.
Like, that needs to go away now. He is a good player who could become a very good player. He's clearly very talented. Like you said, Wijnaldum's a great example. How underappreciated and disrespected Ginny is among the Liverpool fan base is absolutely baffling to me, considering other than Fabinho, he's the best midfielder we've had under Klopp for a prolonged stretch. Now, Thiago's obviously a much better player than Ginny, but Thiago arrived after we'd won the league and Champions League. Ginny was our second best midfielder, winning the league and winning the Champions League, and is massively disrespected. If it is Curtis, if we go big on that striker and it is Curtis, then so be it. All you can do is wish him the best and hope that he can perform at the level that we hope he's capable of, that he's shown flashes of. But we need to be so close to perfect because we're trying to make up a massive financial gap to City. We can't afford some of the learning time that they can afford for certain players. And like you see with Foden, I mean, Foden's an 8 in anybody else's team. Foden's an 8. Yeah. And yet Pep will use him as a false 9. He'll use him as a winger. He won't use him in midfield because he doesn't trust him there. I think you've got to have, in midfield right now, to be competing with them, your midfield has to be pretty close to flawless. And in 3 years, maybe Curtis is close to flawless. But right now, that's not the player he is. I'm not against it, but it would be a letdown for me if we go into next season with that group of right-sided 8s and we end up in the same circle of Henderson ends the season starting, because that's what will happen. You know yourself, we've seen it time and again. For any of the others to hold that position down, they have to be 8 out of 10 every single week. He can be 6 out of 10 every single week and still get picked. Ox was better than him for about a year and a half and couldn't get a regular start because Ox would have ups and downs. Curtis will have ups and downs. Harvey will have ups and downs, and Klopp will revert to going for Henderson. You've got to have, I think, that consistently high level, and I don't think Curtis has it yet.
Fair enough. Who's your number 4?
My number 4 is my sort of wild card option that I know is not going to happen. It's a talent play. It's again, as we talked about on another podcast with certain players, the idea of them might be better than the realization of them. But my thought was, I'd love Kovacic. If I could have Kovacic in that role, I'd be absolutely delighted. So I went looking for players that were similar, and the likes of Guimaraes and Renato Sanchez and Toni Kroos and Luka Modric and Naby Keita pop up. But if you work your way down the list, one player that stands out, and I know he's available this summer and could be available at a bargain, but may not pass the dickhead test, is Tanguy Ndombele. He's just really good at everything. It's a motivation thing with him. Could Klopp get him in the right headspace?
Are Liverpool in a position where we need to take that risk? If it's deemed a risk that one area of his game, whichever one it is, and not just Ndombele but anybody, right? Take buying a centre forward or buying a new right back who's going to come over train, whatever it is, yeah. I'm not talking here about how good they could be if you train them right. I'm talking about if there is a doubt over an area of their game. Are Liverpool in a position where they need to do that? Are there not other players who you could, for example, get for the same amount of money and do a similar sort of job, but don't have that question mark over part of their game?
For the likely price tag, I mean, I think if I look at your list, Benacer would probably be similarly priced. He's less of a risk. Lovro Mayer would be similarly priced. I think he's less of a risk as well. He'd be a lot less than obviously Declan Rice, Jude Bellingham. He'd be less than Sergei. He'd be less than Gavi. It's risk versus reward, though, with him. Look, the thing is, I know we're not going to do it because we're so meticulous in our transfer approach. And I think his time at Spurs and his loan back to Lyon, I think it would raise so many red flags for them that what he did at Lyon before moving to Spurs would probably take a back seat to all of it. And they'd probably look more at, like I said, the realization of him than the idea of him. But there is a version of him that is just unstoppable next to Fabinho and Thiago, with them controlling the game and him just being allowed to impact the game in the final third with his natural ability. Like, he's a good presser as well. Wins a lot of tackles. He's a great dribbler. He's one of the best dribblers in Europe. He's in the 99th percentile. He's a good passer of the ball, really progressive, creates a lot of chances, can score goals from midfield as well. And I think that is something that would open up even more if he played that bit more advanced. But no, I think the last couple of years would certainly outweigh. And even like this is his numbers that I'm looking at are from the last 365 days. So they're down numbers based on, compared to what he would have done at Lyon originally. I still think we'd look elsewhere.
Probably right, although it's also probably worth mentioning, like you say, the meticulous approach. It doesn't just count for what people have done, but how they would integrate in the group and how we would get the most out of them and all the rest of it. And that is probably where people like Milner and
Henderson and Virgil, those stronger personalities to keep him in line. Yeah, unlike Spurs, where
every single game in training.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Where it's a very different approach to, the laissez-faire attitude at Spurs, where, if you want to turn up one every 3 games, pre-Conte, that was kind of fine. Also, I would say, in his defense, he joined Spurs at an awful time, where it was very clear something was wrong with Pochettino at the club, and he was distancing himself from the players. So he joins under Pochettino, and then Poch is gone, 2 months later? And a completely different type of manager comes in Mourinho, who wants very different things from his players and is a very different personality. So I think there are some mitigating circumstances with his spell at Spurs. He didn't help himself, though. But when I see what Kovacic has been able to do at Chelsea, and I just think if we could get someone that could do a lot of that more advanced, Ndombele is probably the one that could do it if you could. But he may just have that Pogba factor where you need to sign 12 players to unlock him, whereas what you want is a player to unlock other things. Give me your 5th one then.
Dave, you can just say it. Just Kovacic. We don't have to get someone like him. Let's just get him finally. But
they're not going to sell to us. They're not. I've made my peace with the fact that I'm never going to see Mateo Kovacic or Saul play for Liverpool. It will fucking haunt me forever. But we've had chances to sign Kovacic in the past, and we stupidly have just not done it. Like, there's no way we couldn't have got him in on loan in the summer of 2018 when he went to Chelsea. There's no way he wasn't been offered around. So we likely declined the option to buy the opportunity to take him, which is just silly because he'd fit like a glove into this team.
He certainly would. He is probably the biggest Klopp type of midfielder I've ever seen. But anywho, let's not bring the tone of things down and leave me crying at the end of the podcast. My final one, right? I've gone a bit rogue outside the normal names and stuff. I went looking for someone who I can think play exactly, basically as a literal Tchouaméni alternative, who can play as that aggressive 8 and be a progressive player in those terms, or could slot straight in and replace Fabinho as a 6 if he's rested, injured, suspended finally for getting too many yellow cards or whatever it is that we need to do. And the best one that I could come up with is probably going to be expensive because he's tied into a long-term contract, but he's a player who I really enjoyed watching this season. He's only 21. I think he could get so much better, but he's had quite an explosive season, to be perfectly honest. Quadio Kone was at Borussia.
Yes. So he was our top pick as a
Oh.
Tchouaméni alternative on the Transfer Committee podcast.
Oh, there you go.
So, yeah, 100% on board with him. Absolutely, you will get absolutely no debate from me. That kid is really good. 21 years of age. Like you said, a phenomenally good season with Gladbach in a bad Gladbach team. But his aggression, his ball carrying, his tackling, his positioning, the whole package is there with him. I would be on board with signing him 100%. And I think if you see, the thing with him is, and what we decided to do on the Transfer Committee pod was, because we looked at Tchouaméni and said, right, we thought we were going to get him for around 60. What's Kone going to cost? And we figured, well, say 65, I think it was for Tchouaméni. We figured probably somewhere in that 30 to 35 million pound range. Now, I know he has the long contract, but it's still Gladbach, and there's still a club that are struggling financially. It's one of the reasons their sporting director resigned. It's because there's just no money to spend. So I do wonder, if you threw 35 million at them, would they be tempted to bite? Because I think they only paid like 7 million for him or something. It was something low.
It was not a lot that they paid for him at all. I think it was like €9 million or something like that. I really, like I said, enjoyed seeing him, and I think he's got a lot of attributes that already match what we've got in midfield in terms of physicality and size, and very, very quick in nipping the ball off people when they try to break out. Really good at the what I would say is maybe the classic Thiago sort of challenge, where people are trying to break away and he just gets a toe in. It's towed not as an interception, but a pass to someone else, who then one touches it back to Thiago and he spins the other way and he's gone. And Kone is really, really good at that as well. Good carrying the ball, good at looking up as soon as he's got it on the turn and playing that pass into feet. Like I say, I think there's quite a bit more to come from him in an attacking sense as well. But recoveries, settling in as a 6 when people have gone out of position or are caught on the counter-attack. His recovery pace is good. Really, really clever defender positionally. And I was thinking probably in that general Jota, Diaz, Konate sort of price bracket. I think I'd probably go, even as high as 45 with add-ons and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, for a 21-year-old with that type of potential, I definitely think you could justify it, and he's got that flexibility. He could be like, if you wanted against certain teams, we've talked before about kind of that defensive attacking midfielder. He could be that for you. Win the ball really high up the pitch and start turning things over. The young man Sam Maguire showed me a graph he put together, and I think it was it ball winning and progressive passes combined, and the nearest name to Tchouaméni was Quadio Kone. So yeah, I'm 100% on board. Now, if it was a case that we had set aside, the princely sum of 65 million for Tchouaméni, and we were to get Kone for 35 plus add-ons, bringing it to 45, that still leaves 30 million in the bag. So in that regard, you could actually buy 2, and if Ox and Milner are leaving, we could do it getting 2 in, and Tchouaméni or Kone could play all 3 roles, and you could still get that more attack-minded, creative one in. So you could still go Lovro, or you could go for someone that I think is one of the most talented young players in the world, in Dominik Szoboszlai, who was recently rumoured to be going to Real Sociedad for about 25 million. Now, I think he's a better version of Curtis Jones. I think he's a more developed version of Curtis Jones. Shoots with both feet, great passer, good cross through the ball, can drift from an inside position to an outside position, has versatility. He's played as an 8, a 10, a winger. He is used to big games. He's used to pressure. He's been carrying his national team for a couple of years now already. And I think the upside of Dominik is fairly ferocious. So if we could come out of a window with Kone and him. Now that would be, you add those two to what's remaining of the midfield after Milner and Henderson go, or Milner and Oxlade-Chamberlain go. You could loan Curtis for a year. Maybe you send Curtis on loan to Gladbach in that Kone deal, and he goes there and plays 35 games. That type of, or 34 games it will be in the Bundesliga. That type of 2-edition midfield, that would make me very, very happy. I think you cover every base with those two.
Yeah, it's definitely a fair point. If we go a little lower than Tchouameni's price, then you can certainly bulk up the squad a little bit more if that's the way that they think should be the case. Obviously, the alternative is to, if we only wanted to add one new face in midfield, is to add that to the budget of another position, which obviously we'll cover in the next podcast, I guess, with the forward line.
Yes. So we will do our ideas for replacing Sadio on a podcast next week. Is there any other names that kind of popped up for you when you were looking at these midfielders that you think would be interesting? Maybe a little bit, more attack-minded, or a little bit more of a wide player, so you're looking at a slight change in shape, because obviously we've seen that when Harvey played there, especially, he played largely as a right winger despite being the right side. Is there anyone else that kind of popped for you?
Well, there wasn't really in terms of attacking players, because I was always keeping it with parameters in mind of replicating what Tchouameni would give, off the ball and defensively, that side of thing. I was looking at that kind of alternative. But I'll give you an alternative scenario instead. And I'm not sure it's one that you'll be massively on board with to start with, but it's definitely worth considering given what we've done previously. And that is, if Liverpool cannot get the one that they wanted, they've been prepared to wait. And whether that's, half a season or an entire season and then go for somebody else. So if they didn't get Tchouameni and they look at all these other alternatives that we've listed and that they've looked at themselves and think, not quite. Would you be that surprised if they just went, nope?
I would be quite surprised if they didn't sign someone. I would be. I think because Ox is leaving, and it does look more and more like Milner's going to leave. I think just from a pure numbers point of view, you're going to have to bring someone in. But I mean, for me, our midfield is what cost us the title this season. That lack of a legitimate third starter, for me, that cost us the title this season. I think we lost the league in midfielding games. You look at the Leicester game, you look at the West Ham game, the Brighton game, the Brentford game. We got beaten in midfield in those games. You look at the games against the top clubs. We didn't win a single game against City, Chelsea, or Spurs, and I thought we got outplayed in midfield in most of them. So I think if they don't address the midfield, I think it's a major failing. So it would surprise me. Now, it wouldn't surprise me if they kind of looked at Jude Bellingham and thought, right, we can't actually do better than him, so we'll wait for him. The problem is, what happens if he gets a better offer? What happens if in 12 months City turn around to him and go, Liverpool offered you what, 200 grand a week? Here's 300 grand a week. Or United did it, or not Spurs, but say Chelsea did it. So if someone else gazumps us, then what have we done other than waste a year waiting on a player that we weren't certain we would get? It was different with Naby. Like, we waited for Virgil because Virgil had given us his word. Virgil was only going to sign for us. That's why we waited for him. And we had to wait for him because Tom Werner has a big mouth. We waited for Naby, but we signed Naby. If we could sign Jude this summer to come next summer, fine. I would be on board with that. But not waiting on a whim. Not on the idea that we might get Jude. Because for all we know, Jude absolutely explodes this season. And Dortmund turn around next summer and go, right, that 100 million? Yeah, no, not that anymore. It's 120 million or 130 million. Because he's got that in his locker. He's got that ability to go out next season and explode. And all of a sudden, we can't compete for that kind of price. So I think it would be foolish to wait. Unless we can confirm that transfer this summer.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I think it is quite important that we do add one. Like I say, keep that progression and rebuild of the team going. And midfield does look to be, I would say, even above the forward line, the priority to add one in this year. And we'll see what type of player that is.
And with Kone, like if we got Kone and Dominic, you can start to project out Dominic as, the starting right-sided one who can also be a 10. Kone as, a rotation player across all three positions who long-term is the Fabinho successor. And then you've still got that left-sided role, which in a 3 could be Jude if it's a midfield pairing. It could be Jude and Kone as the 2 with Dominic ahead. That type of thing would work. But I do think on the players we've gone over today, outside of Jude, I mean, Gavi is probably the one. Go and get him now. And then you've got your successor to Thiago long term, and you can still get Jude next summer.
Yeah, that would suit me. I mean, like I said, if you can get Gavi, just get him. It doesn't honestly matter if he's the perfect fit for what you were looking for this summer. He can be anything you need him to be for the next 10 years if you keep hold of him for that long. He is that kind of player. It's not like when you're going for Erling Haaland, for example, if you don't use your centre forward in that position in that way, you probably don't get Haaland because he's not going to be anything else. If you do use a midfielder in a different way, if you have 3 midfielders, he can adapt to any of them. If you change formations, he can adapt to any of that. Gavi's he's a different kind of prospect. That's an immense player right there.
Yeah, 100%. Right, we will leave it there for today. Anything you want to plug before we go?
No.
Oh, well then. Nothing for you to read, folks. Follow Karl on Twitter @KarlMatchett. He'll link his work there when he eventually does some. He's busy moving house and very carefully packing his foam hands for the move. And follow Guy Drinkle @GuyDrinkle, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed listening to this Anfield Index show. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel so future podcasts find their way to your device automatically. There's nothing quite like fan engagement, and we'd love to know what you think of anything discussed on this show. The best way to get in touch is over on our free Discord community, where both podcasters and listeners debate the hottest LFC topics 24/7. Sign up free now at anfieldindex.com/Discord. You won't regret it. You can also follow us on Twitter @AnfieldIndex and find us on Facebook by searching for Anfield Index. Oh, and before you go, we'd love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. It only takes a couple of seconds, and it means the world to the people who create these free shows.